Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are offering this tour in both English and Spanish. If you haven't already, please click the globe icon on the bottom of your screen and choose which language you prefer, even if it's English. If you do not hit a button now, you will not hear the audio correctly going forward.
Buenas tardes, este evento va a ser en inglés y en español. Para las personas que van a escuchar este evento en español, por favor, pueden mirar en la parte de abajo de su computadora, está un pequeño globo, hagan clic ahí y escojan español. Y también si están utilizando su celular, hay 3 puntitos en la parte de abajo y busquen el globito de nuevo, interpretación, escojan español y listo.
Thank you, Erica. Housekeeping aside, it's heartening to see the following worker ownership has across the Commonwealth. My name is Abby Zell. I am a co-owner at South Mountain Company, located on the island of Martha's Vineyard. Senator Sear is my rep. I am also half of the 2-woman team representing Massachusetts in the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives State Advocacy Fellowship. This event grew out of that program and from Karen and I wanting to leverage our stories as worker owners to motivate action on Beacon Hill. You will hear those stories in just a moment, and from all of our incredible panelists. But before we dive in, I want to open up the floor to our co-hosts and champions, Representative Paul Mark and Senator Julian Sear, without whom Massachusetts' cooperative landscape would look very different. Welcome.
How's it going? Thank you for having us. Thank you for putting this together. I just want to, before I give my little pitch, I've been looking through the chat. I want to acknowledge a couple of other legislators from the House side that are on here. I see Representative Sabadosa, Representative Eiderhoven, Representative Blay, Representative Owens, and Representative Whips. And I see staff from the offices of new Representative Belcedo, Representative Keefe, Representative Gentile, and Representative Farley Bouvier. So thank you all for joining us on this briefing today. And thank you to Karen and Abby and Alex and all the others for all the great work you've been doing. This is an important issue for me, and I'll just give a really quick pitch. When I was 12 years old, my father got laid off from his job. The company shut down, the warehouse went out of business, moved out of town, right? And we found out on the evening news 2 days before Christmas, no cell phones back then, before he could get home and tell anybody. Guess what? Employee-owned businesses, worker co-ops, they have the same chance of success or failure, but they don't do things like that. They don't suddenly sell out and move out of town 2 days before Christmas. They engage the workers that are there. They engage the communities where they work. They make sure that employees and employers are all stakeholders, considered important parts of the decision-making process, and considered important, valuable members of this team and of an organization that wants to continue in the future. So I've been filing worker co-op legislation since I got into office back in 2011. I've tried to pass things in the budget. I've tried to pass things through the legislative process. I've had a lot of great partners join me in these efforts over the years. And I've been really grateful since Senator Sear came into office to have him be such an outstanding partner on the Senate side for a lot of these opportunities. And I tell this story every once in a while. I filed a budget amendment to get the employee ownership, Office of Employee Ownership and Involvement back from zero funding after the last Great Recession. And I filed it for 6-7 years on the House side, and I could never get a Senate co-sponsor. And sure enough, as soon as Senator Sear came into office, he took that lead. He took on being the champion for this on the Senate side, and we got it back and funded for the first time ever a couple of years ago. And also in no small part, thanks to the help of Senator Spilka, who wrote the original legislation on this when she worked for Senator Magnani. So a very important thing, an idea, keeping businesses local, keeping businesses sustainable, keeping businesses engaged in the community for the long term. Really happy to be here today, really happy to have so many colleagues joining us, and really thankful again for the various organizations today putting this together to make sure people see firsthand how important and how productive some of these businesses can really be. So thank you for letting me say a couple of words.
Thank you. Senator Sear, would you like to share your story?
Sure. Good afternoon, and it's good to be with all of you, and thank you to Representative Mark for that very generous introduction. if things go well, he's probably going to be joining me in the Senate. So we'll have to figure out who champions these issues in the next session. But I think worker ownership is something that I've always been keen on, and certainly when I joined the legislature and realized the very significant advantages and benefits through actually federal tax reform out of the 1980s, which was a bipartisan initiative. But really, I think my interest in this really stems from being someone who grew up in my own family's small business. My family are restaurant people. My parents worked in restaurants for over a decade on the Outer Cape, came to the Outer Cape and made their lives in restaurants, and then were able to open their own restaurant, which we had for 28 years. And I spent 14 seasons waiting on tables, working behind the line. So probably the thing I've done longest in my life is to be in the service industry and the restaurant industry. But when I think of that business, which was sort of a real mainstay, the community on the Outer Cape, when my parents were sort of looking to get out of the business, I wish that employee ownership was an option that they were aware of. They just weren't aware of that option. And increasingly, particularly in parts of the Commonwealth, like Cape Cod, like Martha's Vineyard, like Nantucket, where our property values have been going up and up, but especially, in this pandemic era, have just skyrocketed. Property prices in Barnstable County have increased 18% a year. It increasingly means that the most valuable part of your business ain't the business, it's the real estate it's sitting on. And we've actually had this phenomenon happen in Provincetown where a number of restaurants have been converted to private homes. And that's probably only going to be continuing because the cost of getting into these businesses, the barrier to entry is just so high. And so, I think of your favorite, I think people's favorite vacation destinations, right? You always have a go-to clam shack or a lobster joint, or, if you're going to the Berkshires, I don't know, Mark would tell you where to go, but right, like all those sort of iconic places you're going to, those are family-owned businesses. And often when the family, either decides to sell or the next generation, didn't want to take it over, my sister and I weren't interested in doing that. They really don't have options. And I think that worker ownership really is a model that we really should be pursuing to sustain these, long time sort of iconic businesses.
Well, thank you too for sharing your story. It's powerful to hear the reasons behind your advocacy. That is the point of today, and Karen and I will follow suit in just a moment. But before we do, I want to frankly state that as two white women, we are hardly representative of the Commonwealth's co-owners, 57% of which identify as people of color. We're delighted to have media from Energía and Riquezas del Campo to share with you today, but there are so many other stories worth hearing. Therefore, we've created a Google Doc, which Mo will drop a link to in the chat now, listing all the worker cooperatives in Massachusetts. Each business name is hyperlinked to a website. We encourage you to contact those in your area and more. Each has a unique story to tell and one that is best told first person. To that effect, here is mine. South Mountain is an integrated architecture, engineering, building, interiors, and solar company. We do all the parts from beginning to end. We've been around for 45 years. We're committed to people and planet as much as to profits. 2/3 of our 37 employees share ownership, and the rest are on that path. The company is built upon humble beginnings. Our founder is the second hippie on the right in this photograph, John Abrams. In the mid-70s, John and some friends started building houses on the island. At the time, they were wholly unqualified to do so. Each day, they worked hard at the job site. Each night, they spread out on the floor with a pile of carpentry books, trying desperately to unriddle the next day's work. John had an older friend and mentor that followed this cycle in the early days. Once the two were walking through a project and the friend remarked, "Beautiful, artful, but are you making any money?" "No," John chuckled, "we seem to lose it on every job." "Well, Abrams," the friend said, "you've got a unique idea here, subsidized housing for the rich." That bombshell inspired John to learn about business, what it is, how to do it, the impact it can have, and how to bring about truly fair profits. This pursuit turned into a passion. Not only is it alive and well in John today, but that fire has spread to include our 22 owners and a vast network of allies. Amongst these are support organizations like the ICA Group, who provided the technical assistance for our 1987 transition, employee-owned companies that have inspired us like King Arthur Flour and Namaste Solar, and employee-owned companies we've inspired like Big Meister Design Build and Big Timberworks. My start at South Mountain came in the form of a 6-month internship. I was 22, fresh out of college. The only jobs I'd known up until that point were short stints as a barista, a camp counselor, a waitress, and a deckhand. Needless to say, the experience rocked my world. What I found that fall was a small group of committed individuals on a mission to make the world better through business. They provided long-term, stable, meaningful jobs with living wages, industry-leading benefits, and the chance to join them in ownership after year 5. They allocated 20% of every year's net profits to charitable giving, regularly engaged in pro bono work, and were recognized for their leadership and advocacy, often in our close-knit community. They kept nothing close to the vest, but shared their knowledge and experience far and wide for the benefit of others. They viewed every project as an opportunity to further instill their values. Can we make it high performance, low carbon, net zero? Could the profits from this job subsidize affordable housing for someone who really needs it? A culture of teamwork, foresight, fulfillment, and fun permeated everything. Even their 401k and equity investments were mindfully made. It is impossible to exist in this kind of environment and not be changed by it. It raises the bar you have for yourself. It encourages you to push back on the status quo. It sits on your shoulder and whispers when necessary, resist the urge to settle. Had the Vineyard and/or South Mountain not been the place for me, I would have, knowing my worth, fiercely advocated for it at the next job. As it was, I stayed, put my head down, and bought in as an owner at the age of 29. I want as many people as possible to experience one of those two outcomes, and the earlier in life, the better. Here is the kind of change worker ownership could spark in your constituency. Compared to conventional businesses, worker-owned companies average 33% higher wages, 2.5 times greater retirement accounts, and 92% higher net household income. During the past 7 years, 6 first-generation employees have retired from South Mountain. Collectively, they represent 180 years of employment. 6 people, 180 years. Employees are making more money, they live and spend locally. Over time, that results in community wealth, which we know can have its own ripple effect. As I stated before, 57% of worker owners identify as people of color. Likewise, 63% of them identify as female. Under normal circumstances, worker-owned businesses are 66% more likely to succeed than conventional businesses. In a crisis, they are 7 times less likely to lay off workers. Economist Richard Wolff once wrote, "If our workplaces had been democratized long ago, would the workers have stopped raising their own wages? Hardly. Would they have destroyed their own jobs by moving production overseas? Doubt it. Would they have employed technologies that pollute the local environment? No, they live here. Would they have allowed some to earn astronomical salaries while the rest got no raises? No way. Our economic history over the last 30 years would have been radically improved if we had a different way of organizing our enterprises." And lastly, this is a big one for this audience. If you spend your workdays in an environment of collaboration, mutual respect, and shared power, it is bound to spill over into other parts of your life. Here are the kind of issues worker ownership could help combat in your constituency. The core principles of worker ownership are equality, equity, and solidarity. When universally accepted, they effectively level the playing field. Additionally, the practice of sharing profits has proven an effective means of closing the racial wealth gap. Worker co-ops are resilient. Studies show they weather this storm far better than conventional businesses. If history is any indicator, there will be more storms. Studies showed that employees at worker co-ops are overwhelmingly happier than those at conventional businesses. This is the direct result of dignified jobs, workplace democracy, living wages, and exemplary benefits. And 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day. Nearly 2 million of them are small business owners. All must figure out what to do with those enterprises they've poured decades of heart and soul into. Converting companies to worker ownership using the available financing for worker buyout would allow those who helped build the business to reap its rewards. It would also mean wealth, power, and stability for their local community. In conclusion, growing the worker cooperative approach has the potential to positively affect the economy, our democracy, and the quality of working people's lives. It is not a stretch to say that the benefits of the democratic workplace may even aid and influence the essential repair of our battered civic landscape. It could change, in effect, the chemistry of our culture. My challenge for you today is this: champion worker ownership. Be that initial drop. It won't be long before the positive impacts are being felt across the water. Now I'll turn it over to Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Your overview of these few impressive statistics really helped to differentiate worker ownership from the daily grind one may be familiar with in typical corporate America. I would also like to welcome and thank everyone attending today's webinar. The few businesses we are featuring are part of a very important ownership niche of the economy, and we hope you all leave today feeling even more excited about worker ownership. Before I speak about PV squared solar, I'd like to say that in my experience in the few corporate jobs I've had, primarily in banking, and I also heard of a solar company that laid off most of its Massachusetts workforce on Earth Day. It is in such stark contrast to the transparent and collaborative roll up your sleeves together spirit of the cooperative I am in now that, as I've mentioned to a few here today, I hope all entrepreneurs, young and old, farmer and financier, crafter and caregiver, find their way to employee ownership. Our economy would certainly be more robust and resilient. I want to start my presentation by sharing a personal story and by highlighting one of my solar customers, the farming cooperative Riquezas del Campo. There's not too much in common between my story as an early entrepreneur and the story of this immigrant-led organic farm. Community-oriented service, yes, but when it comes to achieving greatness, the owners and staff members of Riquezas del Campo really shine. 12 years ago, I started an energy efficiency training center with a green building partner, and we bootstrapped our way through an unsuccessful pilot program with a utility company. I also founded and ran a marketing agency for 5 years and struggled in a really competitive marketplace that ultimately got the better of me. I've since learned how resilience grows in community. It gave me such joy to help the members of Riquezas del Campo strategize about their energy goals and build a solar array on top of their refrigeration trailer pictured here. We were fortunate that the proximity of the utility substation made what could have been a very expensive interconnection process doable. But what really made this dream a reality was the grant funding. Without it, the cost of even a small solar array would have been prohibitive. Later in our program, you'll see a video about an energy efficiency company that was also grant funded and in their 12th year in business now has just had their most profitable year ever after many lean years. Now a bit about PV squared. This slide is one of hundreds of similar images we have of crew members on residential job sites, lining up or cleaning up after installing project components from solar modules to inverters, to wiring, to fasteners and other hardware. We have about 50 employees and roughly 2/3 of us are worker owners. Most of our work is residential, but in terms of total kilowatts, commercial projects are about 50% of our work in typical years. 2022 marks PV Squared's 20th anniversary, 20 years in business. And this project, installed at River Valley Co-op in East Hampton, was one of our largest and most collaborative. We serve Western Central Massachusetts, and for cooperative-focused businesses like Equal Exchange, other parts of the state or neighboring states. We were founded as a worker cooperative and have been supported by and have supported many other businesses in establishing governance models, writing bylaws, sharing cooperative agreements, collaborating on market and marketing approaches, and having open-hearted conversations about what we've learned from the School of Hard Knocks. I've joined members of our buying cooperative, Amicus Solar, to lobby for extended tax credits for renewable energy in DC. And I've lobbied here in Boston for climate bills, Indigenous rights bills, and other things. I find that when things feel overwhelming in the world, it is deeply satisfying to join in with a big group of other advocates to raise our voices and help legislators hear about and better understand the issues we contend with. I would love to see all economic support agencies imbued with the ability to function similarly to the collaborative buying cooperative PV Squared has benefited from so greatly. Another gratifying experience we had with a few Amicus Solar and Western Massachusetts community members was in 2017, when we designed and built a number of mobile solar trailers and shipped them to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. And because of that experience, we made a PV Squared solar trailer for going to festivals and trade shows, and we'd be happy to have more community organizations use it. I've been an owner of PV Squared for exactly 2 years. During the first year and 11 months, I waited for my full calendar year at the co-op to pass so that I could join our Worker Owners in Training program, which was also a full year before I could officially join the ranks. Even though I'd been familiar with the governance model as an interim CEO of another cooperative, I respect our time investment as a way to help future owners marinate in the process. Every cooperative is and can be uniquely set up and modified along the way based on the collective interests of the workers. And now I have a video for you that a couple of my colleagues and I put together with our thoughts about the importance of democratic workplaces.
The past 2 years of COVID have really helped us to see how resilient the worker cooperative model is at PV Squared. I mean, we're all kind of facing the effects of the Great Resignation and what it's doing to us personally, and it's helping us to see how deeply resilient our heart and solar model really is when push comes to shove.
Democracy in the workplace strengthens the backbone of democracy as an institution and form of government, because instead of expecting us to have kind of a separation between living in a democracy as a form of government, but then spending 40 hours a week in what amounts to either a dictatorship or an oligarchy, it melds those two together so that we can live democratically every day, not just at the polls or not just when we show up at town meetings.
There are 351 municipalities in Massachusetts, and it's an easy number to remember, the 351-to-1 ratio that most corporations have in their wage gap between generally the CEO and the lowest paid worker. Worker cooperatives generally have a 3-to-1 pay gap, and at PV Squared it's more like 2-to-1.
Many people want agency over their day-to-day activities in the workplace, and I think that by setting up a company in the form of a worker-owned cooperative, what that does is it instills in the business model, and hopefully something that permeates through the workplace culture, is a feeling of trust and ownership over your own day-to-day work, and then also collaboration and cooperation within the company.
There's so many things to say about what's wrong with capitalism, serving shareholder wealth, and without having options. You have options with co-ops, And that's why Congress needs to really recognize and support the value of worker co-ops.
And it's no longer an owner versus employee battle. It's looking at the pot and figuring out how to make it so that we can thrive and hopefully grow the pot so that we can continue to thrive, reinvest, and pay ourselves a living wage.
With more technical assistance and more grant funding and funding opportunities, and certainly more education, the goodwill of people wanting to start businesses and convert corporations to worker cooperatives can happen, can flourish. And I think now is a really good time for that. And I'm thrilled that our state representative in Franklin County, Paul Mark, is such a great advocate for worker cooperative policy.
Well, thank you all again for being here today. And now I would like to introduce to you the woman who helped make this U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives Policy and Advocacy Fellowship possible for me and Abby, Mo Mankling.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Mo Mankling. As Karen said, I am the policy director at the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. Huge props to Abby and Karen for putting this together, and big thank yous to Representative Paul Mark and Senator Sear for your ongoing support and being here and helping to organize this event. So the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives is the membership organization where we operate at the grassroots level, organizing worker cooperatives and democratic workplaces across the US. In the last decade, we've seen a really huge increase in worker cooperatives and increasing bipartisan support of the worker ownership model to ensure the growth and parity of this model with other small businesses that make up the backbone of our economy. We represent hundreds of co-ops that put people front and center and engage in education and advocacy to make sure that worker co-ops like PV Squared, South Mountain, Riquezas del Campos, and Energía get the support that they need and deserve in order to thrive in Massachusetts and beyond. We've seen a really big uptick in interest, particularly since the Mainstream Employee Ownership Act of 2018 brought worker ownership back into the limelight, directing the Small Business Administration to promote shared ownership models. That momentum of that bill becoming law led to a lot greater recognition of co-ops at every level of government, especially as the global pandemic brought worker inequities and unsafe working conditions into sharp focus. We're really seeing co-ops as an important tool to addressing these issues and to build community wealth. So we're not just building, building the same thing that we had previously, but we're really building back a better economy than we had previously. So we're seeing legislation from the Capital for Cooperatives Act at the federal level to bills being introduced at the state level. It's really exciting to see the wide array of policies and initiatives
Well, I think we're going to need to go to Dara. Sorry, Mo, that you are frozen. We thank you so much for your presentation, and everybody check out the link in the chat. Welcome, Dara from ICA Group.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Mo. My name is Dara Nussbaum Vasquez, and I'm Vice President at the ICA Group. We are a national organization based here in Massachusetts, and we provide business consulting, training, and technical assistance around all types of employee ownership, with a focus on closing the racial wealth gap and preserving pathways to the middle class and good jobs. We've helped countless business owners, including South Mountain and Big Meister, as mentioned earlier, transition their companies to employee ownership and grow over the years. Next slide, please. We administer the Massachusetts Center for Employee Ownership, or MassCEO, as it's known for short, which is funded through the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Office of Business Development. Thank you to the foresight and the hard work of many of the champions who have already been mentioned or who are in this room, among them Senate President Karen Spilka, who, as Representative Mark noted earlier, was the author of the original legislation to create the Mass Office. Former State Senator Dave Magnani, who she was working for at the time and continues to be a tireless advocate, and Senator Sear, Representative Mark, and Representative Gentile, who have continued the charge, together with all of the co-ops and ESOPs, again, many of them on this tour, that have advocated, invested their sweat equity, and are testaments to success. Massachusetts government saw the power that employee ownership holds and has established an office to make it an available option for even more businesses, future worker owners, and communities. This is an incredible success that we can build upon and scale and expand access in low-income communities, communities of color, and gateway cities. MassCEO provides free succession planning, next slide please, and helps business owners explore ownership as one of their options. Actually, I'm sorry, it was the slide before that. We also assist employee-owned companies through a suite of tools on governance structures, operations, and expansion, as well as a referral network of service providers across the state to help with technical assistance, education, and financing. Many of them have joined on this tour and are current members of the Coalition for Worker Ownership and Power, or future members, maybe after this tour. We work closely with government partners and communities to integrate employee ownership into your toolkits for workforce development and economic development, and to increase access to workers of color and owners of color and in gateway cities. And there is clearly a need. Abby mentioned the silver tsunami of 10,000 baby boomers turning 75 each day. This is a serious threat to the business landscape in our Commonwealth, with half of the businesses in Massachusetts owned by people poised to retire over the next 5 to 7 years, employing over 750,000 workers that could be out of a job. Despite many small business owners' retirement savings tied up in their business, we know that only 20% of businesses end up selling on the private market. COVID has brought an additional wave of business closures and exacerbated longstanding racial disparities. For example, under the pandemic, we saw in the early months the impact on Black-owned businesses, with 41% of Black-owned businesses shut down compared to 17% of white-owned businesses. This is a dire situation, but the upside is that employee ownership is a proven strategy that we can all harness for an economic recovery that is equitable, by helping businesses transition to their next generation of owners and keep jobs, assets, and services in our communities. In order to do this, we need to ensure that existing employee-owned companies have the business supports mentioned in this legislative platform by the Coalition for Worker Ownership and Power, like training, technical assistance, and financing. I have 2 asks for you today. The first, please refer businesses in your networks and communities to MassCEO so we can together help expand employee ownership by helping businesses explore their options through a free feasibility assessment that we offer that's valued at up to $10,000 in the private sector. And the second ask, especially for worker cooperatives and ESOPs on this tour, please fill out the employee ownership census released this month and linked here in the chat so we can together show the competitive advantage of the employee ownership sector for resilience, higher wages, and wealth creation. And let us know your ongoing needs so that we can together make a case for even more business supports and financing, which Alex is going to speak about now.
Thank you, Dara. That's some provocative numbers there. Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Papali, Political Director at the Center for Economic Democracy, CED. I help to staff co-op the Coalition for Worker Ownership and Power, along with Coalition Coordinator Sarah Asefa, who's also here today. First of all, though, just kudos to Karen and Abby in particular. They're new to this policy work, but with great enthusiasm, they took the initiative to organize today's tour of these democratic workplaces. And that reflects the passion that we see regularly among workers who control their economic futures. So one key principle of the co-op movement is that we're stronger together. And that's why co-op as a coalition includes not just worker co-ops, but also a whole ecosystem, organizations both developing pipelines of workers who want to control their futures, and those who are helping to ensure their success, like grassroots community and interfaith groups whose members might be interested in starting a business, capital providers enabling new investments by worker owners, technical assistance providers preparing workers to own and operate a democratic business, organized labor and worker centers that are centering workers' rights, attorneys, academics, policy experts, all of whom are helping to develop a policy foundation to strengthen the on-the-ground organizing. We're so proud of the work that Co-op has done over the past couple of years, building out solid statewide organizing infrastructure to make workers' ownership of their businesses and control of their workplaces a viable option for entrepreneurs across Massachusetts and beyond. As we've been hearing, worker ownership of workplaces is alive and well in Massachusetts, and many others want in. But also, as Dara's just informed us, not all communities have the same level of access to these opportunities. This is a pattern that's been replicated for a long time, but we are aiming to bridge that wealth and opportunity gap. Study after study shows that worker-controlled businesses employ a greater proportion of people of color than conventional ones. And also that these businesses were far likelier to stay afloat and to keep workers and their communities stable while the COVID cataclysm decimated traditional businesses. There's many ways that we can advance and fortify that worker ownership ecosystem as a viable option for people looking to either start a business or convert a boss worker workplace to a worker owner one. The Co-op Coalition has developed a policy platform of 4 planks, you can see here, that would give especially folks from low-income communities and communities of color a strong boost to get going. As Joint Rule 10 Day and then the budget season after that approach, we could really use your help to advance these important interventions that have been voted by member consensus. So first up is H2059, House 2059, Enact, expanding worker ownership training opportunities, sponsored by our event hosts, Rep. Paul Mark, along with Rep. Erica Eiderhoven, who's also here in the audience, and the bill's currently in the Labor Committee. This bill makes simple and revenue neutral language changes that would allow workforce training programs that already exist for underemployed and unemployed workers or those in job transition, such as those under WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, OJT, on the job training, or TOP, the Training Opportunities Program, to include training in business development, operation, management skills, and so on, meeting an unmet need that's expressed consistently by new worker owners. Next up is Senate 1223, an act ensuring fair wage representation, fair worker representation on corporate boards of directors. And that's sponsored by Senators Jason Lewis and Jamie Eldridge. This bill aims to give workers a say in their company's decisions. It would require Massachusetts corporations with annual revenues greater than $100 million to ensure that no less than 40% of board of director seats be elected by employees, with the same duties and responsibilities as directors elected by the shareholders. This bill parallels the Accountable Capitalism Act filed by Senator Elizabeth Warren, which itself borrows from successful precedent in Germany and elsewhere. The last 2 items are budget amendments, which we aim to pass this spring, either in a second ARPA supplemental budget or the FY23 annual budget. First, we propose to file an amendment for $500,000 to enhance technical assistance supports for worker co-ops under the Small Business Technical Assistance Program of the Mass Growth Capital Corporation. These funds would allow competent TA providers, Massachusetts already has a robust network, to work directly with prospective worker owners in helping guide research, market analysis, assembling capital, and establishing and operating their enterprises. This is an intensive process, but it prepares groups of entrepreneurs to take the reins of a business, often for the first time. And the last item is a budget amendment for $4 million to be held as a pool of capital administered by the Co-op Fund of New England. It would provide grants and loan guarantees to worker-owned enterprises. This would enable them to secure some stability in today's precarious economic waters, especially during the vulnerable initial phase of development. We decided not to take on, during our first legislative cycle, more of the great bills out there supporting worker ownership this session, including worthy ones filed by our own event hosts. Some of these that we have taken on may seem like minor changes or small sums, in comparison to the much more generous state supports for traditional businesses, but they would establish basic infrastructure that could help jumpstart worker ownership and workplace democracy all across our Commonwealth. Many thanks to you for your interest in growing our sector, and we look forward to your support in the building. And of course, feel free to reach out to me or Sarah at any time for more details. Alex at economicdemocracy.us or sarah.a@economicdemocracy.us. We have 2 Sarahs. So I'll now pass it back to you, Karen, to bring us home.
Sarah, you had your hand up. Well, thank you, Alex. That was fantastic. So much information shared with all of our guests today. But in summary, if you're on board with worker ownership, these are the actions that you could take to advance it. One is to get to know the worker owner business, support organizations in your area, refer conventional businesses in your networks and communities to the Mass Center for Employee Ownership, and support co-ops, the Coalition of Worker Ownership Empowers platform, and fill out the census. That's going to be dropped in the chat. We will also follow up with you over email as well. But before we wrap up with a final closing remarks by Representative Mark, I'd like to share one final video from a thriving green energy company in Holyoke, Energia, that has benefited from worker ownership in a gateway community. Hello, Mark Tajima, worker owner of Energia.
Well, hello, Karen Ribeiro, worker owner of PV Squared. We don't get to say that often enough.
I know, for sure. It was so great to talk with you a few days ago and hear about Energia's one of your most profitable years after 12 years in business. And I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about the beginning year, like the founding and the importance of getting some grant funding and how that set you up to be such a thriving energy efficiency company.
Yeah, we love talking about this, and we never would have made it without the great help from Health and Human Services, who actually underwrote a grant for us of $650,000 about 12 years ago.
Wow.
And it was pretty amazing to be able to just get that kind of money to work with. We took a great number of the workers that came out of the Green Jobs Training Program and employed them as first jobs at Energia or Energia, depending upon where you're coming from. That money held us for about 4 years. And so from the 4th year on, we've been running on our own steam. We have 27 employees.
Wow.
One of our very first employee, who we hired when he was 16 years old, only on a part-time basis, Jamil Brito, has just been promoted to Chief Operations Officer,
wow.
The #2 position at Energia. This young man, just not even 30 yet, I believe he's turning 30 this year. Proof in the pudding that if you work really hard, you can grow and you can become the top of any organization.
Awesome. And certainly with the silver tsunami, so to speak, that we're experiencing, it's really that workforce development is a really critical piece of what we need to fund worker cooperatives and worker ownership to help us
have such a large amount of our workforce that is graying and that are going to be retiring in the next 10 years. Now's the moment, and now's the time to sort of take action on redeveloping our workforce and making sure that it's ready for the next 10 or 20 years.
Exactly, in the next generations. Well, thanks to all of you for watching our program. Representative Mark, would you like to close us out before we get into questions and answers?
I would love to. It says that I cannot restart my video, which I'm sure nobody's complaining about, but it says the host is, okay, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody that presented today and everybody that I know has done so much work over the previous couple of months, getting this process up and running, getting everything ready for today. And I think really pulling this off really successfully. A lot of participants, so really great job. Thank you for including me and letting me and Senator Sear be a part of it. I think it was a great summary of why employee ownership and worker cooperatives really matter and are really something worth pursuing at a legislative level here in Massachusetts. You know, we talked about fairness on the job. We talked about sustainable local investments and local growth. We talked about democracy, equality, and worker participation on the job and in the business community. We talked about preparing for that silver tsunami of the baby boomers that are getting ready to retire in a really large number very soon. And then talking about just building our communities in a sustainable and renewable way that's going to keep our economy our own and keep our economy stable and growing into the future, which is, I think, what we really want to accomplish in a Commonwealth. So just to mention quickly, Rep. Michelle Dubois got on and the office of Rep. Machino got on. I thank you so much, all of my colleagues in the House, for being here today, and God willing, my future colleagues in the Senate as well. And as legislators, this is a great time. Take a few minutes, advocate to these committees about the bills. If you're really involved in the bills and you want to see them move forward, budget season's coming, so there's going to be budget amendments that me and others on this call are going to be sponsoring and co-sponsoring. We'd love to have you participate in that. And to all the participants out there, constituents, you know, if your legislator's not here, please do try to include them, try to get them involved, because we need their help to make this all successful. So again, thank you so much for having me here, and great job, everybody, really.
Thank you so much, Representative Mark, and good luck on in your campaign for the Senate. Now I believe our group of expert panelists will stay on this line for another 10 minutes to field follow-up questions from the chat. We have a couple of here. So if you have any questions about what you did or did not hear today, or about what you would still like to learn about the Mass cooperative landscape, please reach out to one of the panelists. This question is for you, Representative Mark. What kind of trends have you seen in terms of worker owners reaching out to you with their thoughts and concerns?
It's actually been a lot of it over the 11 years. So one of the reasons I actually started filing this, in addition to my personal story and being a union member and a union activist for so many years, but when I started campaigning in 2010, I found all kinds of cooperative businesses, especially in the Pioneer Valley, that has always been part of my representative districts. And I would go to them and ask them, you know, this is a great model. How can we make this thing a reality? How do we go in this direction? And I've worked with various activists, various stakeholders, various think tanks, as it were, to come up with some of the legislation, to come up with some of the budget amendments. And I found a lot of great support in the community. You look at who's on this call, not just me and Senator Sear, where you're talking Berkshires to the Cape and Islands, so the whole state, but every member that's on here today from the legislature. I think we've got almost the entire state covered throughout. So where I see a weakness maybe is getting into Boston a little more would be helpful, and trying to get, I'm sure there's a lot of support in the city proper, but like trying to harness that a bit more. And then, yeah, I've had opportunity, people around the world, like literally out of this country, have invited me to be part of talks to compare what's going on in the UK, what's going on in places in Spain, and sometimes virtually, sometimes actually in person, comparing best practices, people wanting to take what we did with what is now called Mass CEO, but used to be Mass EIO, and us learning from laws offering tax advantages in other countries to try to make it more attractive here, because that seems to be one of the things that sometimes gets in the way, is you have businesses want to convert, but either A, they don't have the technical knowledge, and they need someone to point them in the right direction, or B, you know, if you're an owner, you want to keep this business in the family. With the family could mean that the coworkers, the employees, but it would be so much more money if you did the other thing. And so just kind of adding that little bit of incentive. But yeah, these are all things that I've heard about in the last 10, 11 years. And I think the moment is ripe right now because of COVID to really get people interested and excited about this. And they're already thinking about it. So trying to get them either through legislation or just through awareness and education, get them moving in that direction to like, let's make this a reality, is a lot of what I've been hearing lately, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer, Mark. We had another question submitted by someone who registered for the event early, and that is, what are some of the biggest challenges? Dara, do you want to kick that off?
Sure. The number one thing that I would say is just awareness. So employee ownership is can be thought of as the best kept secret in economic development and workforce development and business development. So I think the way to overcome that is just supporting education and outreach efforts that so many of us who are joining on this tour, so many community-based organizations and small business support organizations are doing to get the word out in communities. The other thing that would help tremendously, of course, is building out the infrastructure and funding to level the playing field for employee-owned companies, in much the same way that there's a huge infrastructure right around conventional businesses and SBA programs, and a lot of this is already applicable to employee-owned companies, and for others there are some tweaks that need to be made in order to allow full access, or there's new things that we can do to encourage sale and growth of employee-owned firms versus to private equity, or for businesses just selling off parts of their company and those jobs really leaving the communities. And actually one more is just the financing, is that it's a myth that you have to have the assets as an individual worker to purchase into your company. And actually it's set up so that with leveraged buyouts, again, like conventional owned businesses, there's financing available, and lenders who specialize in that, like the Cooperative Fund of New England and LEAF, the Fund for Jobs Worth Owning, so that a successful business itself can take out the loan and then pay it back over time through the profits of the company, and that workers then become owners. And I guess I would turn it back over to either you, Abby, or Karen, if there's anything you want to mention just as worker cooperatives around challenges and how it connects to the Ledge platform.
Yeah, well, I'll just say how important what you just mentioned there of the funding access. The startup, the ramp up process for a worker cooperative is a little longer because of the governance model and putting it together and coming together in consensus around bylaws and governance. So the funding is really key, as we've seen with with Energía and Riquezas del Campo for getting supports and pulling all of that great democratic vision together.
And I would just add, it's really all about your tribe. The technical assistants and people that are familiar with this model. Throughout our fellowship, Karen and I have gotten to know a lot of other worker owners, and many of them live in areas where like they don't even have access to a CPA that's familiar with the cooperative model. And so really having those professionals that are familiar with this model being able to support and for them to be able to answer your questions is so important. And then another piece of advice that our founder, John, is always telling folks is, the time to transition from a sole proprietorship to a worker ownership should also include really taking a good long look at the business. If you have a dysfunctional business and then you transform it into a worker cooperative, you have a dysfunctional worker cooperative. So use that opportunity to transition as a time to look inward and really sort of lean out your culture and the processes in the business as well.
Awesome. I have another question here that I think might be best for Dara as well. Question is, what is a realistic amount of time to allot for transition from a sole proprietorship to a worker-owned cooperative? And maybe you could also speak to the time to transition from a corporation to an employee-owned ESOP.
Sure. It's really one of the beauties of this process is that it's based on the owner's timeline. So it can be as quick as something like 3 or 6 months. If there's an urgent need to exit, it can be planned over several years. and built into the business plan of the company. We found typically it's around a year. And that again is like we would follow the timeline of the owner and the workers.
Great. We've got another question here from Elliot Hunnewell. What kind of government co-op interactions are working? For example, when the government procures co-op services, tax considerations, zonings, etc. Mo or Alex, do you want to take the lead on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit. What's exciting is that there are many different kinds of initiatives at every level that are working to, both educate about cooperatives and make it easier for them to access funds. For instance, in Santa Clara, California, we partnered with a coalition of people from the worker co-op community to work with the city of Santa Clara on the worker co-op initiative to educate selling business owners, where we did a whole series of sessions to talking about everything from kind of like, the legal aspects of transitioning your business to just kind of like, how do you start up a worker cooperative, to just, introducing people to previously selling business owners so they could, get a realistic view of what it looks like to actually convert to a worker cooperative or start one. So that's in Santa Clara. In New York, the Owner to Owners initiative was basically a hotline where people could just call in and learn about who they should be going to if they're interested in selling their business, educating people just about the idea. I think we've talked a lot about the idea that, it's a lot of the visibility of people understanding that cooperativism is an option for them, whether it's starting a business or converting one. So that was an initiative that happened last year that really helped to like cultivate leads and cultivate just general understanding and introduce it to the wider mindset. At the federal level, right now there's a bill called the Regional Innovation Hub Act that's meant to support equitable development of technology hubs throughout the country. So ensuring that, as we build technology infrastructure in the US, that we're making sure that those businesses are also informed by and centered on the workers who are not just potential workers, but also potential owners of those businesses. And then lastly, one thing that I'll say in the last year is that the SBA recently ensured that cooperatives have access to the economic injury disaster loans and the Paycheck Protection Program loans, many of which I know a lot of people on this call have accessed, which has previously been a really huge hurdle for cooperatives because, some financial providers just don't know about co-ops, but having the SBA really be a backbone and helping to share information about co-ops, similar to how many of the senators and representatives here are making sure that happens at the Massachusetts level. That's really what we need to ensure that that co-ops get parity with other small businesses. So there's many other things to talk about, but those are just a couple peeks into some of the exciting work that's going on.
Alex, anything to add?
I wouldn't add anything. It's such a great resource to have Mo in these conversations. But I might just pass it to Rep. Mark, or I think maybe Senator Sears' office as well as the sponsor of the tax credit bill in Massachusetts. Maybe Jeff, you could speak to that, or Rep. Mark.
Sounds like Senator Sear wants it to be me. I'm sorry. What was I didn't catch the question.
Your tax credit bill.
Yeah.
People are asking about potential tax benefits in Massachusetts.
Yeah, if so right now these bills are before I believe the Committee on Revenue still, and so what people that are on from the legislature already know this, but people that are constituents watching, all of the bills that we have are supposed to be reported out by the first Wednesday in February, so about a week and a half from now. And so if people are interested in accessing the benefits of this bill that would happen if it were passed, this is the time right now to be in touch with your legislator. Ask them to contact the Joint Committee on Revenue. If it's a different bill that's before Labor and Workforce, ask them to contact that committee, and we can get the bill numbers to everybody. And then if people like have questions on the actual text or anything like that, you know, you can always feel free to, if you're watching this, email me. I'll throw my actual email into the chat for follow-up questions or anything like that. But this is a crucial time in that, yeah, this is when the legislature is going to determine what bills are going to continue on and going to have a chance, and what bills are going to kind of be sent back for what we call study. So like to look back over and kind of determine, does this need more work? Is there more clarification? That kind of thing. And then with the tax benefits bill specifically, now there's not a plan yet in the works, but assuming it moves out of committee, we can also work on this at the budget process as well. And for the House, that's in April, and the Senate, that's in May. And so again, this is the right time for constituents to be in touch with the legislators. And yeah, I hope that answers the question. Sorry if I wasn't properly paying attention, because I wasn't.
All right, well, we have one last question. We're a bit over time, but I think we'll go for it. And I think, Mo, maybe you can answer this question, which is also from Elliot Honeywell. How are some co-ops successfully managing employee health insurance? Seems like a big one.
It is quite a big one, and one that we've been working on for many years. I added some information in the chat just for the sake of time and so people can explore a little bit. But, you know, every small business has this like overwhelming burden of understanding health insurance, which I'm sure is why you're asking the question. And a few years ago, we brought worker owners from across the country together to understand like what are the challenges, both for regular like health insurance, but also preventative measures, just general wellness. You know, one thing that's really great about the cooperative ecosystem is that people are always willing to share and to, you know, help each other to figure out like what are the best ways that we can do health together. So we've been building this infrastructure for doing health education and equity. So we actually help people on a state-to-state basis to understand what are the best options for their small business. And we're seeing people like sharing information like within the state. We're looking at creating you know, regional hubs to get better rates for health insurance. I'll also add a link to you know, our health equity initiative page. There's a report about our health equity convening that goes through some really exciting, you know, examples of how cooperatives have banded together to do things like hire their own doctor, or, you know, just like share things like, you know, acupuncture, or, you know, like different ways for people to promote like overall wellness. So yeah, that program has been in development since 2017, and we're happy to offer not just health insurance, but dental, vision, accident and disability, flexible spending accounts. There's a lot of organizing that needs to be done, not just to actually provide the services, but really educate people about them. And I think a lot of the people that are on this call actually access those benefits. So, you know, there's always more to be done, but certainly, you know, the co-op community is very oriented around making sure that we take care of each other's health.
All right, that's all we have time for, folks. Thank you so much for joining, and we hope you have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.